In today's video, I'm going to show you how I put together our 30-gallon-an-hour water maker using basic off-the-shelf parts. I'll show you the parts and pieces I used for the major components, as well as how to run it, how to flush it out, that sort of thing. But before we get into that, there's a couple of things we should talk about. First of all, if you have specific comments or questions, leave them down in the comment section below and I'll do my best to answer them. But we are actively cruising and spend most of our time in off-the-grid locations where internet access is hard to come by. So since a lot of our time is off the grid with no internet access, I'm hoping this can become a community resource where you may be able to help us out. So if you have specific water maker knowledge and can answer technical questions or know of better parts and pieces, more efficient from better suppliers, better prices, that sort of thing, leave them in the comment section below and hopefully we can make this a community resource and help each other out. So down in the description below of this video, I've included the major components, the model numbers, and where I purchased them all. But you're still going to have to do some legwork. You're going to have to figure out your own plumbing sources, your own wiring, and how and where you're going to install all this in your boat. It's a fairly complex system and every boat's different. So just because I did something a certain way in our boat or put it in a certain location, it doesn't mean it's going to fit in your boat or work the same exact way. You're going to have to do a little work. So this water maker makes roughly 30 gallons an hour. It's going to vary depending on your feed water source. While we were cruising up the Inside Passage towards Alaska, we were making low 40 gallons an hour, but there was a lot of glacial runoff. Salinity was less in the water. Down here where we are now in southern Mexico, we're making roughly 32, 34 gallons an hour. So it's going to vary. We've seen as low as 28. We've seen as high as a little over 40. It's going to vary. But also with this water maker, it's what I call the brute force method. It's loud, it's noisy, but it pumps out a lot of water. So I put this water maker in 6 to 7 years ago, and in the time we've been cruising, it's basically made all of our water. So I know it works. But because I put this in 6 or 7 years ago, there may be more efficient parts and pieces available now that weren't available then. So if you have knowledge of that, put it down in the comment section below, and again, let's make this a community resource where we help each other out. If you haven't done it yet, subscribe to the channel. And if you learn something or decide to take on this project and you save a few bucks, take me out to lunch. Because I love tacos. I love them, I love them, I love them. And there's a link down below where you can do that. So this system consists of basically 5 different components. First of all, it's the pre-filters, then it goes to the pumps and the motors. After that, it's the membranes, then a control panel, and finally a power source. For us, this power source is a Honda 2000 watt generator. It's widely used in the cruising community. It's reliable, it's quiet, and pretty fuel efficient. If you have an other option, that's great. On our boat, we can actually run it through the generator, or we have a 2000 watt Magnum pure sine inverter as well. So for motoring and making power, we can actually just run it through the inverter and not have to fire up the generator. Things get a little funky if you don't have a pure sine wave inverter trying to power the motor. That's the way it goes. So we do have a dedicated through hole in the bathroom underneath the sink in the cabinet. It's easy access. We can open it up, and directly from the through hole it goes to a sea strainer. And that sea strainer is in an important place as well because it's easy accessible. We have sucked up fish, seaweed, plastic, you name it, it's been sucked up in there, and to have easy access to that to clean it out is pretty important. Underneath the floor in the bilge is access to the pre-filters and the control panel. So you're going to have to make your own control panel. I used 1/2-inch starboard just because I had this stuff lying around. And for me, I wanted everything in one location to run this water maker. It's got the valves, the switches, everything you need to operate the system in one convenient location. So this control panel lives underneath the floor in the bilge for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's the only place I had to put it. And that's something that I can't stress enough, is that every boat's different, and you got to figure out on your own where you're going to put all this stuff. It's a fairly large, cumbersome system. But the beauty of it is that you can break it up in different sections of the boat as needed. So for me, the control panel, it's underneath the floor in the bilge. I have easy access to it. and we have a really deep bilge. It's about 3 feet deep, tons of room. I can stand up here and work, dial all the pressure in, and as far as if I do need to do maintenance, it's easily accessible. On the panel, I've got a boost pump switch, high pressure pump switch. This is the needle valve to dial in the pressure, pressure gauge, and right here is the product water flow meter. It's in gallons per minute and liters per minute. On this side of the control panel lives the boost pump and 2 selector valves. This upper valve here is for inlet water flow. In this position, seawater comes into the system. In this position, I can draw water in with this hose here for either flushing or pickling the water maker. This selector valve here is for the product water output. In this position here, it comes out of this hose here for testing. If I push the valve down, it goes through this hose and goes directly into the tank. Since this boost pump is not self-priming, it will need to be installed below the water line. So another one of the things that you're going to have to figure out on your own is which type of hose, fittings, and valves to use. I went with these because they were easily accessible and inexpensive, reliable, and pretty much anywhere in the world I could replace them. Pretty much anywhere you can get a brass ball valve, basic water hose. It's easy. And then as far as the product water going into the tank, our water tank is actually built into the boat. There's no real easy access to it. And rather than disassembling the entire cabinetry to get to that water tank, we actually tapped into the water tank vent line. So right at the top of the tank, there's a vent that comes out. We put in a T and it feeds the water into the tank. It's given us no issue, and it was really the only way we could do it without cutting apart some cabinetry, which we weren't willing to do. So underneath the floor in the bilge is where the pre-filters live. This here is the 20 micron filter, and this is a 5 micron filter. The reason I have them in the bilge is not only for easy access, but when we're swapping out these filters, the water just drains into the bilge and it's no problem. I can't stress this enough. Having the pre-filters in a location where you can get to them easily and where draining water isn't a problem is key. Those are going to be your biggest source of maintenance. So now we're up in the V-berth because this is where the high pressure pump and the membranes live. As with anything on a boat, you got to figure out a place to put them, and underneath the bed was where I could fit this stuff. There are different options for membrane size, but I just chose to go with the 48 inches because that's the most accessible size out there. You can get them all over the world. It's the industry standard. Underneath the bed here, we actually have a lot of storage. Up forward, we got a couple of spare anchors, chain, rod, that sort of thing. In this compartment here, it is sun cover, spare sails, blah, 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 spare parts, lots of different stuff. And this is the compartment that I could fit it in. So since we didn't want to lose all this storage, I built a compartment in here to protect the membranes, high pressure pump and motor, and still be able to keep all this storage area. When I put in this divider here in this compartment, I just had some 1/2-inch plywood lying around. So I drilled a bunch of holes in it for venting, sealed it up with some epoxy sealer, and made it fit. It's not the fanciest thing, but it works. But beyond the holes in the plywood for venting, on the outside of the cabinet, we've got venting as well. The motor and the pump do get hot, and they do need to breathe. This is a 1 horsepower Marathon dual capacitor soft start 1 horsepower 120 volt motor. This is a stainless steel cap pump, which is the high pressure pump. This is the feed to the pump, comes straight from the pre-filters. This is a pressure relief valve or pop-off valve attached to the brine. This tees into the brine output just in case the pressure on the pump gets too high. This blows off and goes right into the brine. So as with everything on the system, just because this is the motor and pump that I'm using, it doesn't have to be that. There may be new things out in the last 6 or 7 years that are more efficient, less expensive, better. I don't know. I don't have internet access. So if you find something that's better, or if you know of something firsthand, put it down in the comments below. And again, hopefully this will be a community resource and we'll be able to build on it. When I first put this water maker together, I had a 1 horsepower motor that I had lying around in my shop, and I figured that would work. It didn't. It was a single capacitor motor that would run off of shore power. If we were plugged into the dock, I could test it and it would work fine, but the Honda 2000 watt generator would not start the motor. So I went and bought this Marathon dual capacitor motor because the Honda would actually run it. So if you're going to use a different motor and have a Honda generator or a small 2000 watt generator, make sure the motor is either soft start, dual capacitor, something along those lines. Otherwise it may not work. Oh yeah, and the other thing with this motor, when I bought this Marathon electric motor, I got it on a farm supply website that was going out of business. So the motor itself was like 80 bucks when I bought it. I don't think that's the case anymore unless you can find a good deal. Again, if you find something, put it down in the comments. These housings are completely off the shelf. Comes with all the mounting, the end caps. You will have to do the plumbing yourself. These are 316 stainless, which is very important. If you are buying fittings, do your best to find 316 stainless. It's much more corrosion resistant than say 304, 308, something like that. Product water, I did use this PEX type hose just because these fittings were slim. I didn't have a whole lot of room in here. So that's the reason I use these rather than this basic type of hose down here. I just didn't have a whole lot of room up in this area to make it fit. So these are what I used. I do have spare hose, spare fittings, just in case something blows out. I also have spare high pressure hoses, which are something you should probably carry if you're going offshore or are going to be in some pretty remote locations. These fittings have held up extremely well for the last couple of years, maybe 2.5 years, something like that. But previous to these type of fittings, we used some other ones, which I can't remember the name right now, but I'll put it up here in the video somewhere. But they did not hold up. These fittings are very important as far as longevity. So these are our high pressure hoses. Actually, these are our spare high pressure hoses. These are a stainless steel braid with a Teflon food grade interior. This blue outer cover is just a silicone for chafe protection. But the important thing with these are the end fittings. These are swage lock fittings, which I think are the best for this type of application. So the previous hose assemblies we had were built by Parker. They were a stainless steel flanged fitting that in theory should have worked out great, but they didn't. We had 2 sets of hoses that all blew out at the actual flanged fitting. These have been on the boat for a couple of years now and have been flawless. They still look like brand new. And again, these are swage lock fittings. They work great. Unfortunately, I don't have a supplier for you on where we got these because we had these made in Mexico here. And so you're gonna have to do a little work and find them on your own. But again, hopefully the community can put something down in the comments below and we can get a source that is reliable that we can use. Alright, since this water maker is not all automatic, you got to do everything yourself. It's basic bare bones, and that's the whole point. So first of all, fire up the power. For us, this water maker runs off a Honda 2000 watt generator. So you can probably hear it in the background. It's running. After that, make sure you got feed water coming into the unit. So at the control panel, we've got 2 different valves. One of them is for the inlet flow, and the other valve is the direction of the product water. This valve right here is for the inlet flow. If I have it to set right here, this is bringing the seawater in. If I bring it up to here, then it's for this hose, which is just a loose hose, and this I can use for flushing out the system or for pickling. This valve right here is for the product water output. If I have the selector right here, it comes out the tube here for testing. If I have it pushed down, that directs the water flow into the tank. So to start the water maker up, I'm going to make sure the flow is set for testing and the inlet is set for seawater coming in. So once the power is going, we'll open up the through hull to make sure water can feed the system, and then we'll turn on the boost pump. We're going to leave the boost pump running for a few minutes just to make sure it flushes all the air out of the line, and we'll go outside and check the through hull to make sure water is coming out. Boost pump's been running for a few minutes, water's coming out the outlet, so we'll turn on the high pressure pump and let that run for a minute. So now the high pressure pump's been running for a minute, so we'll slowly start dialing up the pressure. We're not going to dial up the pressure very fast. You want to slowly pressurize the system so you don't blow anything out. At 600 psi, the system will actually start making water, so we're going to let it sit there for just a minute, maybe a minute or two, and just let things kind of get working. So after the pressure's sat at 600 psi for just a couple of minutes, we'll slowly dial it up to 800, and then we'll test the water. Where we're currently sitting in Mexico at 800 psi, we're making roughly 33 gallons an hour. But this number will vary depending on input conditions. So when we test the water, we're not only using the TDS meter, total dissolved solid meter, but we'll also smell it and taste it just to make sure everything seems right. Under 500 ppm is considered safe to drink. Even though this number varies depending on input conditions, we average around 200. So once you know the water's safe, flip the valve and send it to the tank. That's kind of it as far as starting up the water maker. Now that it's running, we'll actually keep an eye on things for the first 15 minutes, half an hour or so. The pressure will fluctuate a little bit at the beginning till everything stabilizes. So about every 5-10 minutes, I'll double check the pressure, make sure it's still sitting about 800 psi, and then after that, just let it run. Alright, we've been running the water maker for about 2 hours now, so we've made about 65 plus gallons or so. And now I'm going to shut it down and flush it out. So every time we run it, we do flush it out. You want to get all the salt and whatever out of it. And by flushing it out each time, you greatly expand its lifespan. So we do it. So to flush out this water maker, I've got a 5-gallon collapsible bucket that is only used for this water maker. By not using anything else, I'm assuring that no chemicals get into the system. So we'll start by filling up the bucket, and we'll just flip the product water, and that changes the direction of the water from going into the tank to coming into the bucket. So it'll take about 7 or 8 minutes to fill up the bucket, and then we'll run that fresh water through the system. Alright, now we've got a bucket full of water. It's about 5 gallons in there. We're going to dial down the pressure and then switch the selector valve from the seawater inlet and to draw out of the flushing hose. I've got the boost pump and the high pressure pump both running right now to suck the water out of this bucket, and that just sort of speeds things along. Otherwise it takes quite a long time for the boost pump to do it alone. But you want to make sure to turn off the high pressure pump before you suck air into the line. So just keep an eye on it and then shut that off when there's just a little bit of water left in the bucket, and then let the boost pump finish off the job. So as far as tips and tricks for maintenance, there's a few things we should talk about. The biggest maintenance thing is the pre-filters. When we were sailing up north, up the Inside Passage towards Alaska, the pre-filters, those would last roughly 2-3 months before they'd need to be changed. Down here in tropical waters where it's warm and growth is quite a bit faster, they need to be changed roughly every month or so. The biggest way to tell if they need to be changed is how the product water smells. If you have some funky smelling off water, 99% of the time it's the pre-filters that need to be changed. We carry roughly a dozen pre-filters on the boat, both for the 5 micron and the 20 micron, but we generally only use 3 of them. We rotate them out. They're flushable. You can rinse them out. They don't need to be brand new filters each time you swap them. They last a long time. To wash these things out, basically you can tie them onto the end of a rope, agitate them up and down, flush them, and dry them in the sun. If we're underway when I swap them out, I'll drag them behind the boat for 5 or 10 minutes. We tend to run this water maker every 4 or 5 days because that's the amount of water we use on board, but you can go roughly a week between running it. If you go much longer than a week, you are going to have to pickle the system because you get a lot of growth in the water that's going through it. Pickling the water maker is a pretty easy process. It's just like flushing it out. So when we do that, we'll actually make water, and the product water goes in a bucket. We'll mix the pickling solution in and then flush it through the system, and that's it. It's pretty easy. This is what we use to pickle the system. I got this at Cruise RO online. It was cheap. They shipped it out. It was fast. And this little jug right here has lasted us, I don't know, still half there, and I got it about 4 years ago. We don't pickle the system a whole lot because we're actively cruising and using the water maker. When we do store the boat, whether it's on the hard for maintenance or if we're going to be leaving the boat for a while, doing land travel, that sort of thing, we pickle it. It's pretty quick and easy. After the water maker's been pickled for a while, once you want to make fresh water for the boat again, you're going to have to flush all that pickling solution out. We'll generally just run the water maker for 45 minutes to an hour, flushing everything out, and then use the TDS meter to test water so it's below that 500 ppm mark. But more importantly, smell it and taste it before you put it in the tank. You'll be able to taste if there's any of this pickling solution left in there. It's got a bite. And I know that from doing it the hard way. Alright, I think that's kind of the basic gist of this system. If you have any specific questions, again, leave them down in the comment section below, and hopefully we can get some community answers. More than that, if you haven't done it already, subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, and I love tacos! I'm just saying, I love them!